thanks so much for making the time to come today. And I hope everyone can hear if there's translation that's happening. Again, really, really great to see you all. And thanks again for coming. My name is Yayoi, and I'm an art lawyer. So I've been practicing law for close to 2 decades, of which the majority now has been in the art world, working with artists, institutions, and tech companies like Artsy. And now I'm with 2 artists. I represent the estate of American artist Chris Burden and the studio of Nancy Rubens, working in a management, legal, and business capacity. I'm also very lucky that I get to support other artists on a more voluntary basis, and I'm so honored to be in the region, getting to look and learn and speak with you all. So today, we're going to be talking about artist and brand collaborations. We're going to cover what they are, discuss some case studies, some of which might be probably familiar to you, and hopefully some of which may be new to you as well. And then, so that we have some takeaways, we're also going to cover some questions and topics that artists should consider, and also to raise some topics and issues that, on the flip side, brands should consider. I'm going to also try to leave time for questions to the extent members of the audience have specific examples or case studies that they want to discuss with us. So, before collaborations, what was there? Before these artist-brand collaborations, artists exercised their creative license to borrow the intellectual property of companies and attempted to make it their own as part of their artistic practice. So a famous art historical example of this from the United States is Warhol's practice of painting soup cans. That became one of his iconic motifs that he was experimenting with. And he was clearly using the protected intellectual property of the Campbell's Soup Company, but elevating them using his artistic labor and creative talent and co-opting it into his practice. And of course, he used it without permission from the company for his silk screen prints. Right? And so what you're seeing here is tomato soup from Campbell's Soup 1, 1968. It's a screen print in colors. And as a reminder, what Warhol was doing was technically an infringement, a violation of Campbell's intellectual property rights. Eventually, in 1964, Campbell's actually came around to approve of Warhol's use. And what you're seeing up on the screen is a letter sent from the marketing department from Campbell's Soup Company to Warhol. And it's likely that Campbell's decided that the free marketing they were receiving from a very famous artist was a benefit that they are happy with and that they are happy to be associated with. And I think that association piece is key when we think about artist-brand collaborations in the contemporary age. So fast forward to now, where there seems to be a proliferation, a huge amount of these types of collaborations. And I think the most successful ones are the ones that have been discussed and mutually agreed between the artist and brand, which again, from my perspective and my line of work, is a small plus for having negotiations, alignments, and letter agreements between the artist as well as the brand. So up on the screen is my very simple take of the current landscape. So it's a matrix, right? And each collaboration is quite different, of course, And there is no one set successful way to do these collaborations. But here you see the two axes. The horizontal axis is who drives the project concept. So obviously in the course of a project, this can fluctuate. But in general, for purposes of the types of projects we're talking about today, it's usually first driven by the brand. The vertical axis is what level or freedom or agency or autonomy the artist has in terms of their input. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but just to realize that because the project concept is often driven or initiated by the brand, the way in which an artist is expected to participate may be specifically scoped out. So let's move to some case studies because I think it makes it a little bit easier to discuss this in practical terms. And so here is a project concept that's highly driven by the brand with an artist expected to provide a specific scope of work, right? And the best known examples of these things in the commercial arena might be the things that you're seeing up on the screen, which are the Louis Vuitton artist collaborations. And they have been doing it for several decades now. Whether it's having artists do specific capsules like Takashi Murakami or Jeff Koons, or having artists help to design a specific type of handbag. So there's a lot of variety here. For example, Takashi Murakami ended up interpreting the iconic Louis Vuitton monogram. Yayoi Kusama on the bottom applied her signature patterns. An example of Jeff Koons. Jeff Koons decided to feature works from his Gazing Ball series, which are in fact recreated images of master paintings with mirror balls appended to them. So then the Gazing Ball works that Jeff Koons created were then adapted on to the LV bag. So just for comparison, on the left is one of Jeff Koons' works. This one was created in archival pigment print with glass in 2017. And he created this in an edition of 20 plus 5 APs. On the right-hand side is the inspiration piece, Van Gogh's Wheat Field with Cypresses, created in 1880, oil on canvas. And then if we go back, we see the way then that Jeff Koons decided to utilize his imagery on the bag collaboration. Still, other artists were asked to creatively interpret a specific bag, like in the Vuitton Artie Capucine's collection. And here you see it's in its third year in 2021, a collaboration where 6 artists were asked to interpret the well-known Louis Vuitton bag format in a limited edition of 200 each. So last year's artists were from left, Paula Peavy, Zenpanze, Vic Muniz, Donna Huanca, Huang Yuxin, and Gregory Hildebrandt. So a number of international artists being asked to work on these collaborations. And what's significant in this type of collaboration, again, is that it's very brand-driven, right? Because the brand has a quality or a feel they want to uphold, and they believe that collaborating with the artist will enhance that brand imagery. Louis Vuitton explains it like this in Women's Wear Daily, which is a fashion publication that you may be aware of. They said, both the artists and the brand have the same objectives: to make something special and unique that truly combines their universe and creativity with Vuitton's exceptional savoir-faire. And then they went on to explain that some of these artists initially come with sketches, others visit the Vuitton atelier as a starting point, but at the end of the day, the creative process very much depends on their vision the artist's vision and the messages they wish to put across. So they say ultimately, no matter how established or not the artists are, this total sensation of limitless creativity seems to draw them to join us on this exciting project. So that's the brand's point of view. And I think in some ways for these types of collaborations, the artist will be expected to put in a fair amount of work, but there will be a very specific scope, right? For example, it needs to be able to be printed on a bag of a specific size. Let's move to a different type of artist-brand collaboration, and this one is image licensing and reproductions. This is a set of examples of projects that are brand-driven with perhaps slightly lower artist time and energy input than, for example, the design work requested on a bag, for example. So again, it's essentially an image licensing type of project where an artist says, hey, I will let you utilize my imagery for the brand to be able to put it on a product. It's really a productization kind of project where a brand will hopefully ask permission to use an artist's image and reproduce it according to a set of negotiated and agreed terms and conditions. So the example that you see up on the screen is a Uniqlo collaboration. Uniqlo often reproduces t-shirts, creates t-shirts with artists' images on them, and this one reproduces Japanese woodblock print master Great Wave off of Kanagawa from Hokusai, from the 36 views of Mount Fuji, which was originally created in the 1830s. So created a long, long time ago, and now Uniqlo, this clothing company, is reviving it by printing it on their t-shirt. A more potentially contemporary example is from the Ray Johnson estate. Ray Johnson is an American artist, and he was a conceptual artist. And recently, a very small but lovely brand called We Are Brain Dead worked with the estate of Ray Johnson to produce a limited edition line of clothing. I guess the sort of imagery is from Ray Johnson, reproduced on a t-shirt. Let's look to some other examples that are not just t-shirts. This is called the Google Pixel Station Museum project. So it's a collaboration between a company in Japan and Google in the subway systems in Japan, where there were billboards of image reproductions of artists in a subway station for a set period of time. And if you went on the website, users could purchase a limited edition print. When the user also went to the website, they could download as the cover image for their iPhone or their phone one of the images from the artists. And then if you had a Google Pixel phone, the desktop on your phone actually got customized, like on the right, based on the image you downloaded. So this particular collaboration was with artist Ulala Imai, and she is a wonderful painter. And so on the left, you see her actual painting, which is called Adventure from 2021. And then on the right, you see the way that if you downloaded her image as the wallpaper for your phone, the way, and if you had a Google Pixel phone, that your phone desktop wallpaper would look like what you see on the right. So another hybrid example of artist-brand collaborations, which might be driven slightly more by artists, is where the artist or their estate decides to let a company use their IP that they have to produce goods, whether one-offs or part of a line of products that a commercial company usually carries. And what you're seeing on the screen is a collaboration between artist John Bergerman and the company that creates these iPhone phone cover cases called Cassetify. And so this one is specific to a line of iPhone cases that John Bergerman created. He's a UK artist who is known for his drawings, characters, and murals. He creates fine artworks like paintings. He now works in non-fungible tokens, NFTs as well. He also creates books. And so I think in some ways, his mode of artwork translates very easily to image reproductions on objects like this collaboration with phone cases. So let's keep going. Another example is the Keith Haring project with the estate of Keith Haring, undertaken with a camera company called Polaroid. And this Polaroid collaboration happened in June of 2021, so very recent. And in fact, I wanted to discuss this example with you because it was sourced through Keith Haring Estate's agency that works on image reproduction rights. So it was sourced through ArtStar, which is essentially an agency that helps to represent artists and connect them to potential brands. So let's take a little bit of a step back and talk about the basic fundamentals of what's happening on a legal side of things. What are these artists and estates doing? They are monetizing, they are making financial benefit of an asset that they have, namely what's called copyright in their intellectual property. And in Saudi Arabia, the relevant law is the author's right law. So the ability for authors and artists to be able to claim that they own rights to whatever they have created. Right? As a very quick high-level reminder, in the United States, copyright is a bundle of rights. What does that mean? It's actually conceived as a set of ownership rights that the artists themselves can decide to share or give away or transfer or sell, right? And so if there is one high-level key takeaway for all of the artists out there who are kindly listening in, at least in the United States, copyright is a right that artists have and that they have the right to retain and control. It's a way to control the rights that the artists themselves have created in that work. So once you have copyright in your artwork, what can you do with that, right? There are different types of rights, and the rights include things like the right to reproduction and copying, the right to distribute the copies made, the right to perform or display whatever they have created, and the right to make derivative works, so the right to make works that are adapted. So not only do artists have these rights, again, as I mentioned, they can also give them away or share them, and in legal language, that is essentially a license. An artist can license the rights, for example, to make copies, non-exclusively to various third parties. And that is essentially the model that would happen in these artist and brand collaborations. But I think this licensing bit is where an artist or a studio manager or an artist estate administrator can exercise their creativity, both in terms of control as well as limiting the specific ways in which the brand is allowed to use that image. So as I mentioned, in my day job, I represent the estate of American artist Chris Burden. Chris Burden's dates are 1946 to 2015. He worked in sculpture, performance, and installation. He, for example, used his body in early performance works and then eventually transitioned into larger scale site-specific installations. We're very lucky that he is collected at various world institutions, including in places like the MoMA, the Whitney, Middelheim in Antwerp, Inhotim in Brazil, so in various museums around the world. What you're seeing on the screen is Metropolis 2 from 2010. It's a large kinetic sculpture that was created in 2010 and currently installed at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. This is a very, very big piece. It's so big that it takes up a whole room, and it's turned on a couple of times a day. So what you're seeing is in the middle, you might see this sort of like escalator that's turned on. There's an engine that turns it on. And then a bunch of cars, which are attached by magnets on the belt conveyor, slowly rise up. And then they are let loose throughout the sculpture. So it's a kinetic moving sculpture. And it's also, I like to think of it as Burden's ode to a city. And again, it's very big, so it takes up a whole room. Its dimensions are 29 meters by 86 meters by 58 meters. So very, very big. Okay. So at the estate, we take copyright very seriously, right? Because again, this is what Burden left us, and it's the intellectual property that is one of our main assets of the estate. But that having been said, we see value in ensuring that artists' legacies remain valid, extant, and thriving. For me, it's very important that Burden's artwork and knowledge about Burden as an artist continues to be out there in the world in conversation with the next generation of curators and artists as well. So for us, artist intent is very instructive. Burden did think of his artwork as his assets that were meant to be protected. So we do make sure that his IP is protected. But at the same time, I think we have to achieve a fine line between ensuring that the artwork and the artist's work is celebrated versus open to third-party unauthorized copying. Right? Especially in this day and age where everybody has a cell phone, everyone's taking photos and videos, and it's really easy to disseminate images. We want to both say, hey, it's okay for people to come to Metropolis 2, for example, the sculpture, enjoy it, take photos or videos for their personal use. But we don't necessarily want commercial brands coming to take imagery or photos or videos of Metropolis 2 without our permission and without our knowing what the use, their proposed use of that imagery is for. So in practicality, we have some guiding principles. We generally say that it's open access to public and scholars. We want the public to enjoy images of Burden's work. We want scholars to continue to do academic research on Burden's work. But then for commercial use, potential commercial use from a third party, we do generally expect a license fee, and we most certainly negotiate what that license fee is, as well as the terms by which that commercial third party can use those images. And so again, right, not every artist who's around is going to have an access to a lawyer, and that's totally fine. I think it's more important for the artists out there to know that if some third party is attempting to use your images and you have retained your copyright to your work, you have the right to say, please don't use those images, or to say, you can use those images for either a particular fee or for the particular types of use. So I wanted to share with you a specific collaboration that the Burden Estate recently did. We did it with a watchmaker, a historied watchmaker called Vacheron Constantin, and they've been around for a very long time. And what they wanted to do is they came to us, they were very respectful, and they said, hey, we love the way Chris Burden has worked. We want to take as inspiration Metropolis 2, which is the sculpture that you all just saw in a couple of slides back. And we want to do this, we want to take inspiration and help to do a flagship redesign of our store. And the key here is inspiration. We didn't want them to make a new work. We obviously didn't want them to make a new work and say it's a new work by Chris Burden. We wanted it to be a very specific way that it's presented to the public. And so for us, we spent a lot of time talking to the watch house, and we really came down to aligning to the shared vision that Vacheron had as a watchmaker. They feel like the work that they do is a form of art, a form of handicraft, and that they have artistic vision in the creative process. And that's how we got comfortable that the artist Chris Burden's way of artistic practice would have been aligned with the way that Vacheron, the watchmaker, thinks about their watch making, right? And so art and brand collaborations are quite popular these days, and depending upon the artist and their practice, it can be a good way to potentially monetize what the artist has created. Right? This is a fine line to toe, of course, because you want to make sure as the artist that it won't go contrary to your intent. You don't want your imagery to be used solely for the brand. You want to ensure that you're happy to be associated with that brand. But it might also help to create an entirely new audience for you as the artist. So, to bring it back to the Vacheron example, for the estate, we decided that we would work on this collaboration because no new artwork was produced. We felt that there was a mutual alignment between the way that the watchmaker created the work and the way that Burden was as an artist. And we also found, as we continued to speak to the designers working on the project at Vacheron, that there are in fact a lot of crossovers between the art of watchmaking and Burden's practice as a solo artist. Because, for example, we found out that with Vacheron, they only make a small number of watches, and they also still create everything by hand, even in 2022. And so we felt like that art of craftsmanship and that commitment to high quality was something that resonates with the way that Chris Burden is as an artist. Okay, and again, as a reminder, we wanted to do something that was specifically not an image rights reproduction project, but something that was an inspiration. At the same time, though, we also wanted to ensure that people got to learn about Chris Burden's work and the original Chris Burden work that inspired the redesign. So, as part of our agreement for the collaboration, we actually negotiated to have new video footage taken of Metropolis too. And that video footage, once we reviewed and approved it, it was shared not only as didactic material in the Vacheron store, but also we were also able to negotiate having it made archival footage special to the estate. So we got something out of the project as well. We have this now new high definition footage of the sculpture moving, and that was something that we hadn't been able to do for a while, and it was something that was of huge benefit to us. And then the store decided that they would actually have QR codes throughout the store, and when you open the QR code, it jumps to the actual footage of Chris Burden's Metropolis 2. So again, a nod to the original, a way for us to bring in more of Chris Burden's original artwork in this commercial collaboration. That having been said, of course, there are always potential legal troubles that might come up, right? Because sometimes, and unfortunately, brands can be a little bit fast with their borrowing of artists' work. And what do we do in those cases? First of all, if you're an artist and if that has happened to you, I'm sorry that that has happened to you. In those cases, I do think it's important for artists to take a stand if they can, right? So as a reminder, artists' creative practice that is fixed in tangible form is protected by the copyright legal framework in many jurisdictions, including in Saudi Arabia. So while it might be emotionally taxing, I think it's worth it to take a stance. And there's a number of ways for you to think about doing this. Of course, hiring a lawyer might be too expensive and it might be too emotionally difficult to do so, and that's totally understandable, right? So if you can't rely on a legal expert to help you through with the situation, it might be possible to rely on a court of public opinion, and that's mainly taking it to social media, right? But in those cases, I think it's really important to think about what your goals are when you decide to make that stance on social media. Because I think we all need to remember that social media can be a double-edged sword. It can first increase people's awareness about your artwork. It can increase people's awareness about the situation at hand. But once you put something out there, I mean, of course, it's easy enough to delete a tweet or an Instagram post. But once it goes out there and it goes viral, sometimes that is what keeps everything going. And you want to make sure that whatever you are attempting to say to the public, you are willing to stand by, right? And I think it's also important to think about what you want potentially to happen from using social media, right? Do you want, for example, the brand to recognize you or acknowledge your work, that your work was the inspiration for so-and-so, new line of things that they were creating? Do you want, for example, a public apology? That's a slightly different sort of strategy and outcome that you want, right? Or even further, if you want to try to find the silver lining and make this a positive opportunity, do you want to possibly pave the road to future collaborations? Based upon these types of outcomes that you might want, I think the strategy and the tone that you take on social media should be very different. Okay? So each artist has an artistic practice that is uniquely their own and has a special career, and because of this, any sort of planning requires, I think, a unique approach, right? So there is no right or wrong way to do it, just a specific way for each artist. And so how can artists attempt to use copyright as a strategy? So if you're an artist and you've been approached by a brand, that's already huge congratulations, good for you. Now it's an opportunity for you to attempt to advocate for yourself and to attempt to negotiate some terms that are specific to you. And things to think about might include, do you want to be associated with the brand? What does the project potentially give you? Does it maybe give you access to a new audience that you've never had a chance to show your work before? You also want to think about scope of work. How much artistic creativity do you want in the project? And will you get that level of creativity from the brand? So things to continue to think about very specifically in terms of some key takeaways. Has the brand been clear about what your scope of work is? What you as the artist is expected to do? How your imagery will be used? Important to think about requesting a right of review and approval. And that could be anything from reviewing and approving how your imagery is being reproduced. It could even be reviewing and approving prototypes of products that the brand is attempting to create. What does the crediting look like? Have you been promised, or do you want marketing opportunities, right? Do you want it to be brand X artist collaboration special capsule? Do you want the opportunity to be on their Instagram or tagged on their Instagram? Do you want to give talks? Do you want to have some sort of video footage about the collaboration where your words are featured? All these things are important to think about and relevant to ask. It's totally okay to ask for them. And then, of course, transparently speaking, the fee, right? Are you getting a fee? And if so, what is it? Is it a flat fee, like a set fee? Are you getting a royalty based on percentage sold of the product, right? Are you getting your time compensated in other ways? For example, like, are you getting free product or maybe discounted product, right? All those things worth thinking about ahead of time. And again, don't be afraid to attempt to ask for these things. because, at least in the United States, there's no standard yet for what is a reasonable fee for artist participation, whether for better or for worse. For the use of images, say for example, your image is being reproduced on a set of postcards or maybe a t-shirt or something like that, sometimes it's a couple of $100s, right? Could be, and free product. For active participation, where an artist takes on creative initiative and creative services, it can be a lot more. So again, don't be afraid to ask for it. And the brand will usually be, I think, quite transparent about the type of budgeting that they have for these types of collaborations. So then, let's look on the flip side. For those of you who happen to be in the audience representing the brand side of things, right? And here, again, I think usually brands like to work with artists because they think it gives them a coolness factor. Right? It's cool for brands, commercial brands, to be working with artists who are creative and who push creative expression and boundaries. So the brand usually will think about what type of association of artists that they are getting. Are they also getting a new audience with this type of artist? And then they will also think about the positioning of the artist. Are they going to say, well, this artist is being selected to do a capsule series, or it's a one-off, that it's a special collaboration with an artist? And they will obviously, of course, have a very specific budget in mind and a time period for that brand. And so I wanted to sort of like, I've been talking a lot, I feel like, and some of you in the audience may have specific questions. No question is too small. And to the extent you feel like you want to discuss a specific situation you might have, I'm open to that as well. So thank you everybody for your attention and look forward to the conversation. Yes. Sure.
Following from yesterday's IP talk, something really resonated. You were mentioning, okay, how do you deal with the acquisition or the rights around digital artwork? So be it a performance in this case. So you actually digitalize the performance, right? Because it's something that is live, but you record it, so it becomes digital. In this case, I'm kind of wondering, in this new era and world of NFTs, what does that mean? Does it mean that does it mean that I'm more protected as an artist when it comes to selling the video and how it gets distributed later on?
Yes. So thanks for that question. So yesterday we were having a wonderful conversation with Dr. Iman Al-Jabreen, and we were discussing IP policy considerations in the arts and sort of comparing the US copyright law with the Saudi authors' right law. And we were talking about the fact that in order for a non-tangible artistic expression to be copyrighted on the US law, it has to be fixed. So say, for example, unfortunately, a improvised dance performance will unfortunately not be copyrighted because it's not fixed. But one of the ways to do that, as the wonderful audience member was saying, was to take, for example, documentation of that dance. So it becomes a digitization version. It's a fixed format that can then have copyright protection. And so for an artist, if artists out there are looking to wade into the brave new world of non-fungible tokens, so NFTs, and for those of you who need a reminder of what those are very specific video or digital formats that can then be minted and issued by artists as a specific form of art that can then be sold on the blockchain. And in some ways, I think of NFTs as being just another form of digital art. So if the artist decides to mint and issue their work on the blockchain, they are, of course, protected through copyright. But I think the interesting and unfortunate, also double-edged sword thing that we have to think about is that once an image becomes put out there into the internet, it's unfortunately quite readily, easily copied as well, right? And so there, I think, the artist has to think about the balance between, do they want their images widely disseminated and shared with an audience? And then if they're NFT'd, at least they'll be able to reap the financial benefits from both the primary sale, the minting and issuing, as well as the potential resale. So they might be able to get royalty rights from that because it's on the blockchain. So there's a ton of benefits of putting one's work out in that kind of a way. But the flip side of it is that it's also readily right-clickable and copyable as well. And so you know, in some ways, maybe one of the ways to do it is if you are minting and issuing, maybe in the bottom description part of the project, you say copyright so-and-so artist. That could be at least one way that you're putting the world on notice that you are the artist and that you have copyright in the work. Did that answer your question?
It did. It really did. I think in some ways we kind of forget about the digital world and how it's a life of its own.
Yes.
And so many times when you put something out there, you don't know what might happen. So I'm kind of wondering how that translates also to, for example, artists putting images of their artwork on their website, or video or short clips of their artwork on their website. Could be distributed everywhere, right?
Yes.
People are free to.
Yeah, and thanks for that secondary follow-up question, because again, I think it again comes to this like risk-benefit, cost-benefit analysis of like, do you as an artist want to have a website where people can come and learn about your work and then maybe even eventually try to see your work in a museum, or maybe come see the Biennale if you're in the Biennale, right? It's a very powerful tool, I think. And I think most artists these days are expected to have some sort of digital presence, whether on a website or whether on Instagram or what have you. And so one of the things I think is a small tip is just at least sort of like a little bit of a tip is to say at the bottom of your website, copyright so-and-so artist, and just say, you know, and say something like all artwork by so-and-so, copyright so-and-so. So at least people know that your work is out there, but it's also like it is your work, so that people know that it's yours.
That's super clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Hello.
Hi.
One question I had was about this point that you've mentioned, when brands get inspired by an artist's work, and it can get, you know, tough to hire a lawyer or do this and that. You've mentioned the use of, for example, social media. But with that in mind, is there like because I'm sure there's possibility of, for example, the brand taking that and even filing like a counter lawsuit or something of defamation or something like that. So is there any tips for artists or emerging artists who are facing these issues and want to go down that road perhaps on how to protect themselves in such case? Because I understand maybe the brand could say, you know, how are you supporting that claim? Or, you know, it could backfire easily on them. So
Yes.
That's my question.
Yeah, it's a very, very good question, and it is very complicated, right? Because if an artist finds out that a brand is stealing their work, the first thing I think artists feel is that they think it's incredibly unfair and that it's totally unfortunate, right? Because here is a brand who claims that they're cool and they're essentially stealing or plagiarizing or borrowing very heavily from an artist whose sole practice is to be creative, right? And that's entirely unfair. So I do find that artists sometimes first get very, very upset and then automatically take to Instagram or automatically take to Twitter. And I think that can definitely, as you say, backfire, because the brand either might totally ignore them or say, you know, how dare you, like, please substantiate your claim, like, you know, we actually produced this originally in-house or what have you. And so I think the first step, I think, if possible, is for an artist to step back. It's okay to be angry. It's totally okay to be embarrassed and upset and frustrated too, and sort of take that moment to be angry and frustrated, but don't immediately take it to social media, because I think then, of course, there's a possibility for all of this to backfire, as you pointed out. First of all, it might even be possible to write a private email or private correspondence to the brand, right? That might be one way you take it. And it doesn't need to be a legal letter. It could just say, hey, my name is so-and-so, I am an artist, I have created this work. You know, the recent product that you put out looks very, very similar to my work. My work has been around for a while, right? So you're essentially establishing a claim to say, I think that you have borrowed or have been inspired from my work, and say, I would like to receive a response or an opportunity to speak with you all to figure out what's happening. Like, that might be the very first step that one takes. Often with brands, if you go to their terms and services at their website, you can find like a way to contact them, and that might be a way to do it. And then even then, if you don't get any response, then it might be an opportunity to take it a little bit further, to take it to the court of public opinion. But again, as the audience member mentioned, there is an opportunity for it to unfortunately backfire. So I think the artist has to be prepared very specifically to figure out what kind of response they want from the brand, right? And to make sure that they can substantiate it, and if possible, to try to keep it not at all emotional. Any further questions? Again, like, thank you so much for those of you who are in the audience. I so appreciate it. And for those of you who are listening out there in the world, thank you for joining us. And again, it's been such a great honor to be at the Biennial. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.